We're going to start tonight with a resounding result for Pierre Poilievre in his leadership review.
The unsung heroes who built and protect this country, who have it infinitely harder than I do, they never give up, so I have no right to give up.
The Conservative leader delivered a high-stakes Friday night speech at his party's national convention in Calgary to a packed room of more than 2,500 delegates. It was a rousing, nearly 50-minute campaign-style speech filled with familiar attacks on Liberal policies, standing ovations, and chants of Pierre. The results? Poilievre solidified his place as party leader as an overwhelming majority. 87.4% of those in attendance voted in favor of him staying. It's a figure higher than what Stephen Harper achieved at his own leadership review back in 2005, where he got 84.6% of the vote. With me now to talk about that and what's next is the man who will lead the next federal Conservative campaign, Steve Outhouse. Hi, Mr. Outhouse. Pleasure to see you in Ottawa, outside of Calgary.
It's good to be back, I guess.
little colder. Yeah, thank you very much for making the time. I actually just want to start off on something that the Conservatives delivered into our inbox, which is that Mr. Poilievre is going to sit down for a meeting with the Prime Minister on the heels of the letter a few weeks ago that he wrote about interest in collaborating on stuff that, you know, I guess involves a shared agenda and that would address the crisis on a number of different fronts. What is the impetus behind the Conservatives asking for that meeting?
Yeah, well, I think our leader all along has said he wants to get results. He wants to help the government move from rhetoric to results, is the term he used. I mean, ultimately, what we've been talking about all along, and sometimes get chastised for talking about it too much, is that we want to help create, legislation or laws or changes to policies that help Canadians with affordability, housing, fighting crime, things like that. And so I do think there are some shared items of interest that are on the government's agenda right now. Some of them we would like to go further as Conservatives, but things like you saw today, the unanimous consent to move things forward with the HST, we would say that we could go further, but for today, let's get things done. Let's get things done for Canadians.
Does that, I know you say that's been part of the rhetoric for a while, but does it signify from your perspective, is there a strategy behind putting more emphasis on it now?
Yeah, I think everyone acknowledges this is a very serious time for Canada. There's a lot of challenges that are being faced, both domestically and internationally. And so, for this domestic agenda that's there, let's get it done, and let's get it, through Parliament, and let's, move the debate. If there are things that we agree upon, let's just get progress made and get these things in place for Canadians.
So that number, 87.4%, does it make your job easier? And if so, how?
Well, I mean, my job is not easy, so let's just start with that. But it does give clarity. There's a lot of support, obviously, for the leader, and to see that result was very gratifying. I didn't make any predictions beforehand. I just said, we wanted to see a strong result, and I believe that's what we've seen. And we've seen it, perhaps, stronger than some might have, suspected or speculated it might be, and very, very pleased being there on the ground. The mood was very, very good amongst delegates, and I think the vote reflected that. So to have that clarity, for my job, now I can go ahead and start, planning even more for this election for whenever it does happen.
Were you surprised at how high the number was?
So I'm naturally a pessimist, so I don't know if it's surprised or just, I mean, I was once I got there on the ground and started to talk to delegates and talk to people, and I had the chance to talk to a lot of people there in Calgary, you could see the support for the leader was very high, but it was very nice to see the results. So I don't know, I've been in politics long enough to be kind of numb to surprise or what have you, but it was very gratifying to see.
So I would never want to take away from that high level of support, but I spoke to, I say that against the backdrop of asking about the other 12.6%, because they are members of the party. They're obviously not a huge portion of the party that was there, but I did end up speaking to a lot of them who stopped me, even in the airport, for example, who felt kind of isolated in a way from the outcome of this. And I wonder what your party's message or your campaign's message will be to them.
Yeah, and that's fair. Look, we are a party that is, that really embraces the grassroots. We try to do that as best we can. And so I think it's fair that there's people who are going to have different views, and they get a chance to express that through a leadership a vote or a leadership process like they just did. And it was an overwhelming level of support, as you said. But it's fair, I mean, that for people to always want us to do better clear. They want to see us win the next election, and that's exactly what I would tell them, is that we're focused on that. And we're going to look at how to take that percentage and that support we got. We got historic support in the last election, as you know, but it wasn't enough to get over the finish line, and so now we need to build on that. And if they have some concerns and things like that, I'm always open to hearing from them and looking for ways that we can continue to build and do things better and to get over the finish line and win the next campaign.
So let me ask you about that campaign in particular. When you talk about building or growing the number, is that the strategy, to grow the number, or will it be to count on other factors, like, for example, a collapse in Liberal support or a resurgence of NDP support, to be able to get you over the finish line?
So never like to lay out strategy, but I don't think this is really telling too many tales out of school. It's not a great plan to try to count on your opponents failing and hoping that the NDP come back and do this or do that. We have to look at the coalition that Pierre Poilievre has built, that the Conservative Party has built, and that's there, and we have to look at how to build that higher. I do think no one really knows if we're now in this two-party system that sort of is there. Will it return to back a little bit more, normal in the next campaign? I think it's still too early to tell. So from my vantage point, for sure, you need to try to build that coalition and expand it further.
So do you have a gut feeling about whether the two-party system is here to stay, at least for the next election? Like, do you think the NDP will have a resurgence?
I can't guess what that's going to. First of all, I don't know who their leader is going to be. I don't know what issues they're going to choose to go on. So for me, I'll focus on what we're going to do. We're going to continue to try to build that coalition. We're going to be talking about issues, no surprise, of affordability, housing, crime, those things that already have that strong base of support that are there. And some of the things that we hear about how we can communicate a little bit differently and so on, and people might be more open to our message if things were just slightly different and so on. We're open to all that as well.
So let me ask you about that from a more theoretical perspective in a way, because I left the convention, particularly listening to the speech, kind of arriving at the thesis that there was a doubling down over the central message of the last election. That line in the speech about, we've listened and we're not going to abandon our principles. Mm-hmm. Am I accurate in interpreting that means, the central message, the central deliverer of the message in Pierre Poilievre will remain the same, but there will be some tinkering around the edges to address, getting over the hump? Is that the right interpretation from where you sit?
I think that's, I guess I'm going to agree with a chunk of that. That's fair to say that, yes, abandoning your values very rarely pays off in politics. And if we're talking about values of making sure young Canadians can afford homes and that there's less food bank usage and that things are more affordable and that crime starts to drop, I don't think us pivoting away from that helps anybody but our opponents, frankly, in the upcoming election. But are there some things that we can do that build onto that and speak to different age cohorts and different demographics? If there's some things that they want to see from us, and tone seems to be one, and that's fine. I'm very happy to show more facets of our leader. I do think he's a person with a great sense of humor and has a great family, and he's a family person. And so I just think if that's what pardon me, certain people want to see to make themselves more comfortable, then sorry about that, then we're certainly happy to do that.
When you talk about tone, I'll ask you in sort of a crass way, you know what the punditry class is and you've seen the numbers. I'm sure you look at different polls where Mr. Poilievre's own personal popularity has gone down since the election in some instances, certainly since 2022, while Mr. Carney's, the Prime Minister, has gone up. Does Mr. Poilievre, in your view, need to be more likable?
So a few things. I think in general, politicians generally have a likability challenge, but I will say opposition leaders have a special challenge because their job is to get up every day and hold the government to account, and that by its very nature, it, has a contrast to it, and it's sort of something that can look a bit more negative. So I've seen that across the country when people see, and we saw that recently in Newfoundland and Labrador, the campaign I worked on. When Tony Wakeham was the opposition leader for quite a while, and it was, oh, why is he so negative? That's not his personality, but that was the job he has to play. And so in this situation, I do think, again, if we can show other facets of Mr. Poilievre, when he connects with people, it's quite powerful, and he does have a sincere concern. And I think that's, again, back to that authenticity point. he is a fighter. He's fighting on these important issues for Canadians, and I don't think us moving away from that is going to help us.
Are you concerned about, or maybe I'll put it more bluntly, do the Conservatives want an election?
Well, right now, it's not going to be up to us. We'll be ready for one. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line.
I mean, it could be at some point, right? In a minority government, it could be up to the opposition parties if they decide. But at this, I'm talking from like a strategic point of view. I know other stuff will happen in Parliament, but like, if it were up to you, would you be going to the polls now or later, given what the
I mean, generally, less than a year after an election, that's not really a time to go have another election unless there's things that, you know, require that to do. I think the Liberals right now, that looks appealing to them for a whole bunch of reasons, and I'm happy to expand on that, but I'll stick with your question. You know, so for us, we're happy to work in Parliament and get some things done and get results for Canadians and help the government actually advance their agenda and move from, you know, rhetoric to results, as has been said, and that's going to be our focus. But if it happens and an election is forced, we'll be ready. Are
you worried that they get a majority through floor crossers? Are you worried? And particularly, I'll ask against sort of the context of this weekend, where there was that 12.6%. That guy who stopped me at the airport said, I know it's a term that everyone hates to use, but he's a red Tory. And he did, you know, that's what Chris D'Entremont said too. Are you worried about more now that there is this sort of solidification of message?
So I'd like to say to the red Tories across the country that we want to work with the entire coalition, right, the whole Conservative family. I think for us to win this next election, we need to be working together. You know, we need to have those conservative values, those small c conservative values that unite us as a party, and we need to be together as one movement. I can't predict what people are going to do and what motivates them. I mean, certainly, you know, we've been around politics enough to see the crass side of it. You know, the Liberals are one. I mean, I guess we're looking at the, you know, the retirements that are happening. I guess technically it's a little bit further away, but overall, one seat away from the magic number that they're seeking. That is a ground that is ripe for a bidding war to start for any, you know, to go over and look for people in other parties to say, hey, you know, while I can't make a real promise, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, boy, it would sure be great to have you there, and we think you could play a real part on our team. Now, whether they're saying that with actual meaning behind it or just something to lure someone over, I mean, I can't control any of that, and ultimately that's going to be up to individuals and their conscience and what they decide to do. So, you know, but we're going to be looking to kind of work with the whole Conservative movement to win this next election. And, you know, I'll leave it to the Liberals to decide what they're going to do in terms of trying to lure people and play games like that.
One final question outside of the domestic, sort of outside of that same domestic realm. Why wasn't Trump's name used in the speech? And what should it tell us, if anything, about the campaign's approach or the party's approach right now to that issue?
Well, a couple things. I mean, I don't think Trump's name was used in the Davos speech at all.
Which we pointed out frequently,
and that's fair. So, I mean, I don't remember there being a whole lot of debate about, well, you know, should he or should he not have and so on. So, you know, that's fine. We'll get that question. You know, from my perspective, what the leader was talking about was our, you know, our overall approach to international affairs and how we will stand up on the world stage for Canada. You know, we're proud Canadians. We're proud to stand up for our country and against any, you know, other force and, you know, that's coming against us. And so that was a broader point that was made, and I think we're ready to be serious about that for sure.
Is there any hesitation on your party's part to go full force into that issue, either because it seems to be a winning one, if you look at public opinion polls for the Liberals, or because there is a section of your base that doesn't not like Trump?
So two parts to that. I mean, first thing is, no, we're not hesitant to do that. I mean, the way to win an election is to stand up for the country. So if someone is coming against our country, we need to push back against them, and that's just, you know, bottom line. And I forget what the second point I was going to make was. So there we go.
Last question for you, and then you're free, I promise. It was just about whether, you know, I remember listening to the former campaign manager, Jenny Byrne, on a podcast in which she said, you know, there is some crossover, right? And certainly we've seen public opinion polls to that fact. And I'm wondering if there will be any hesitance to dive into that issue for fear of alienating, and other Canadians will criticize this, but for fear of alienating Conservative supporters who don't not like Trump.
Right, and Jenny makes a great point there, and I'll just agree with her on that, is that, you know, a lot within our party. I mean, the reason that the positioning or the posturing of the Liberals was not received well by some in our party is that it's sort of seen as just performance pieces, right? And so for us, I think within the Conservative movement overall, we do strongly value a good relationship with the United States. It's just very difficult with this president to have that right now. You know, so there is an acknowledgement or recognition that, you know, ultimately, deals tend to come out of good conversations and diplomatic approaches and actually people working together. This administration in Washington is making it very, very difficult to do that. But for us, we just want to see results as conservatives, and so that's why it's not the performance side of it is not something we're really looking to do. We want to get those results, and so that's why we're not as keen, I think, to kind of adopt that same posture, but still to stand up for Canada.
It's not about alienating people who might like Trump, though.
The best way to win this election is to stand up for Canada.
Well, that's a note to leave it on then. Mr. Outhouse, a pleasure as always. I appreciate making the time. Thank you.
you.
Steve Outhouse is the Conservative Party's campaign manager.